we can detect within 2 seconds of that audio that is extremely high likelihood of being a synthetic voice. We're going to lock that account. This is too suspicious. We have high confidence. Our models are good enough at understanding the situation. I think the most exciting thing, the guiding light, is Star Trek. You talk aloud to computer and the computer does stuff. That's really cool. We'll call it a voice skin, and it's like a skin in Fortnite, and it'll sell billions of dollars. And it was awesome. That totally made sense in our heads. Voice is a really interesting media type. There's a ton of nuance and signal in voice beyond just like the textual content.
This technology detects fraud, harassment, and even deepfake voices in seconds. My guest is Carter Huffman, the CTO and co-founder of Modulate AI. His team builds real-time speech analysis systems. Stay until the end. You will understand how voice AI, fraud detection, and conversational security are shaping the future of trust in the digital world. Make sure to subscribe and follow on your favorite podcast app and YouTube. If something resonates with you, drop a comment and share your thoughts. I would love to hear your perspective. And now, enjoy the conversation. Welcome, Carter. Thank you for joining me today.
Wonderful. Super excited to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So you CTO and co-founder of Modulate AI. For somebody who never heard of this company, can you tell us what exactly you do?
We build and ship the best voice AI models in the world for understanding what people are saying in a conversation. So we can analyze if people are talking and somebody's harassing somebody else, we can pick that up, or somebody's trying to commit fraud, or somebody's trying to socially engineer their way into a password system. Any of that stuff, anything going on in a conversation, we understand it and let you do something about it.
So why did you choose to go with voice? Was there a specific problem that you were trying to solve, or how did this start?
I've always been passionate about voice, but fundamentally, there's two parts. One is technically voice is a very interesting field to work on. It's very
Mhm.
complicated, very high dimensional signal. There's a ton of nuance. And for those reasons, it's actually often lagged behind text, image, and video in terms of AI and machine learning progress. So I was really drawn to a space that not a lot of people were working in, AI for audio. This was back like 10 years ago or so, where a lot of the focus was on images and video. And I also come
Mhm.
from a physics background, which is very applicable to signals processing. And voice is a really great one dimensional signal that you can apply a lot of your physics intuition to really get a
Mhm.
good understanding of. So it was a really nice fit.
I see. Okay. And then, why do you think analyzing voice with AI is harder than text, for example?
Voice is a really interesting media type. There's a ton of nuance and signal in voice beyond just like the textual content if you do a transcription of what people are saying. But
Mhm.
not all of it is relevant at all times. And you also have a lot of variation in voice signals. So think of like background noise, audio quality, all these sorts of things that historically have thrown off models very easily in terms of this is a new signal my model doesn't know how to deal with, so it just produces garbage. So a lot of the techniques we've applied to voice over a long time are pretty fragile. It's been hard to get robust voice processing for a while because of the huge amount of variation. And even when you do extract info from voice, there's a ton of information that's not always relevant, but some pieces are relevant for some questions and other pieces are relevant for others. So it's hard to pick
Mhm.
out exactly what you need and exactly what's going on.
I see. I was also thinking about like text doesn't really have an emotion. It's just like written on the paper, and however the reader reads it, that's what they translate with their voice. But when people speak, they have all these pauses, maybe a little bit anger and a little bit of, you can notice how they lie, maybe, or how they say something else. So it's interesting how it has more nuances, I guess, for AI models to worry about.
And it's also very person and situation dependent too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Tonality and everything, depends on what kind of conversation you're having. And it also depends on like who you are, right? Like if you've known me for a long time, you're going to pick up on stuff when I'm
Mm-hmm.
conveying information through the sound of my voice, the tone, the cadence, what words I use, right? Diction, all these kinds of things. They all add up
Mm-hmm.
and combine. And for somebody who's known you for a longer time or has context, those can mean something very different than for just a first time introduction. And a lot of AI models these days, memory and history is something that they can struggle with. Every conversation, everything that you throw at an AI model, it's like starting completely from scratch. And
Mm-hmm.
so if you have experiences where you're like, why is the AI model doing this? That's super silly. Like, that doesn't make any sense to me. A lot of that is like you have all these priors and context about what's going on when you're feeding that data in, and the model's seeing it from scratch. This applies all the time in voice because it's a very natural, social, conversational kind of data type.
Yeah, and I also get, I guess it also different where you speak, right? When you go speak on a stage versus speak with your friends or family, it's gonna be a completely different person, if you will, because you're gonna have different things. Yeah.
Absolutely. And the kinds of things that you want to do with that data are completely different as well, right? If I'm giving a presentation and I'm running that presentation through an AI, I may be asking it for feedback so I can improve my tone or something like that. If you're running a social conversation through a voice AI, you might be looking for, are all of the participants in this conversation being treated equally or given the chance to speak? Or is somebody behaving badly or manipulating somebody else? Your objectives in analyzing all those different types of contexts are often very, very different.
Hmm. Okay. And then I also know that you started from gaming industry and built the first product for gaming. What were you trying to solve there with gaming, and why gaming?
For sure, absolutely. So we actually started out building technology to transform the sound of your voice as you're talking, and we thought we'd
Hmm.
go sell this to games because we're big gamers, myself and my co-founder, and we're like, "Hey, I can sound like the character I'm playing. That's really cool. We'll call it a voice skin, and it's like a skin in Fortnite, and it'll sell billions of dollars." And it was awesome. That totally made sense in our heads. It's completely foolproof. We went to gaming companies, and they were like, sounds neat. They loved the tech, but they're like, we don't really have a big use for this right now. Like they didn't think it was as great of an idea as we did. Um,
Hmm.
but but they were asking us all these questions about, can you use voice changing to hide the demographics of people in voice chat, especially things like perceived gender, race, so
Hmm.
that people stop harassing each other based on sexism or racism.
Hmm.
And we were like, well, you could do that. It's a little weird to anonymize everybody to prevent racism, for example. I don't know if that's the right solution. You could use our tech for that. And we were thinking, and kind of realized like that's the problem they really need to solve. They need to find out if people are harassing each other in their games. Toxicity is a massive problem in the gaming ecosystem. It's one of the largest drivers of churn out of games. People are like, this is too toxic. I'm not having fun. I'm leaving.
Hmm.
But toxicity is so nuanced, right? Like you can just throw out a bunch of slurs at people. That's unambiguous, but you can say all sorts of things like nice job, right? And you're being sarcastic and that's toxic.
Hmm.
Or go back to the kitchen, right, is sexist. But it can also be benign in other contexts if you're actually having a social conversation and talking about a kitchen or something. Like there's all this context and nuance, and if you want to do toxicity detection well, you have to really, really, really understand the conversation that's happening in order to make the right decisions. And we realized that that's the tech that those game studios needed. And we took all of our audio and voice AI expertise and applied it towards that tech. And that's what brought us into this voice understanding ecosystem.
I see. Okay. That's very interesting because I remember my experience trying a few times during COVID, trying a few times online gaming. And yeah, there are some people who don't know boundaries, especially when you're not close to them. They can say whatever they want, and there's no consequences. So that's not nice.
That's
Yeah.
exactly the thing, and it only has to happen a couple times. Most gamers are very friendly, social people. They just want to have fun, but you
Mm-hmm.
run into enough of that negative crowd, then that sticks with you, like emotionally, psychologically, to the point where a lot of people just stop engaging and stop socializing,
Mm-hmm.
and then that makes the whole experience less fun and less sticky for the companies. If you're not socializing, you'll just switch to another game.
Right.
So it's a really important problem to solve, and again, most people are fine, but you run into those rare cases, and those have a massively outsized impact.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. So let's talk about how you actually build your product. If you can say, like, generally what's going on under the hood.
Absolutely. So our strategy is that we're trying to understand voice conversations, and there are many different kinds of attributes of a conversation: cadence, emotion, tone, transcription of what you're saying, accent, demographics, all these things that build into voice understanding. So we break the problem down into two hierarchies. The first hierarchy is, can we create a good, rich representation of a conversation that has all of that information extracted so it's all usable in various ways to detect these kinds of things you're looking for?
Mm-hmm.
And that means that as a conversation is happening, we're looking for emotion, tonality, transcription, demographic information, all of that kind of stuff to build up an understanding of what's going on. But we're also feeding and looping that context back into our models to increase our own confidence. So
Mm-hmm.
if I'm sounding excited throughout this whole podcast, that's not a ton of extra information about what's going on at any individual moment. But if I'm sounding excited for 99% of it, and then for 30 seconds I sound kind of neutral, that's a deviation, and the deviation matters. So the context, we're constantly analyzing this context, and we basically build up like a cache at different levels. So we have a high level cache of what's this conversation, what's going on, what are the basics, what are the distributions over all these properties, like emotion per participant, that kind of thing. We
Mm-hmm.
also have like, who are these participants? What is their role in the conversation? What are their objectives at any given time? What are they doing right now? And then lower level, at any individual moment in the conversation, we're looking at what's the deviation from that higher level representation? What's the diff between now and previously? What's changed over the past 2 minutes? These kinds of things. Those are really salient pieces of information that a lot of AI systems, they'll look only at isolated pieces and
Mm-hmm.
process only isolated pieces and then summarize after the fact. And they miss the opportunity to understand the individual pieces in the context of the whole. So we're kind of building that whole representation all at once. So that's hierarchy number one. Hierarchy number two is that for each individual thing you want to understand about a conversation, we have a number of different models in Ensemble that are more or less appropriate for different kinds of situations and contexts. So, for example, we have a model that's incredibly accurate and efficient at really high quality audio, like you would experience on a VoIP call or a pre recorded conversation.
Mm-hmm.
However, that model is completely trash if you run it on an 8 kilohertz Muon coded telephony line, somebody calling over a cell phone and going through a cell tower. And you could try to make a model that's really good at both, but then you have to make a bigger model, and that model has to make trade-offs, and so it's going to kind of be worse at both, and also bigger and more expensive and require more resources. So our solution is actually the complete opposite: make a ton of very tiny models that are extremely accurate in certain circumstances, and then orchestrate them together to only run the models that are appropriate for a certain call. So if I have that ensemble that I was talking about with the telephony 8 kilohertz low quality model and the VoIP high quality model, in this podcast, we would only run the VoIP high quality model. So that saves
Mm-hmm.
on cost while getting really high accuracy. So that's the second level of hierarchy of how we get into analyzing each of those individual signals and get high accuracy while also being extremely low cost.
Yeah, okay. So the main driver is the cost, obviously, that's important. So it's affordable product. And the second one is you can build many like expert models, if you will, that will figure out specifics of that, types of the audio, or maybe types of situations during the audio, what people are saying and things like that. Wow, that's very
Exactly
interesting.
right. Yeah, and the decomposable nature, this ensemble nature, means it's actually really easy to make updates that improve the system without
Right.
having to ship a whole new model. So instead of, waiting months between Opus 4.5 and Opus 4.6, we can add in a
Mm-hmm.
new model on a daily basis, and then we cover a slightly broader set of circumstances or slightly improve that overall accuracy without changing anything about the architecture, how it's deployed, what you can expect from the system. It's a much safer diff, it's a much safer increment. So it makes it a
Mm-hmm.
lot easier to improve the models themselves. And when you were asking about cost earlier,
Mm-hmm.
cost is a massive driver in the audio domain because a lot of the things it's the audio domain's really interesting. A lot of the problems that you want to solve in audio, they come in two classes and only two classes. One class is at some point in the future, I want to get a summary of this and pick out some information, kind of a record or archival analysis. The other is real time. I want to know what's going on right now because something bad might be happening. Fraud might be happening. Security incident might be happening. Harassment might be happening. A crime might be happening. You want to know right now what's going on. And that analysis has to happen proactively, and it has to happen with low latency and high accuracy because you need to respond to something immediately and you need to do it correctly. And you are generally looking across a large number of conversations to try to find a very small subset where something bad is happening. That was how things worked in toxicity and gaming. And gaming
Mm-hmm.
has billions of hours a month of conversations, and that is such a huge amount of data, and you want to pick out these small instances. So you
Mm-hmm.
have to run a lot of those models fast, low latency, high accuracy, and at a huge scale. That means anything but the absolute most cost effective models are
Mm-hmm.
completely out of the running. It makes it a very challenging environment.
Yeah, it makes sense. And then I wanted to understand, how does your product figure out which models to run in a certain conversation? Is there another model that kind of figures out, like, you guys have to work and you three wait, or something like that?
That's exactly right. It's a model selector or orchestration layer that lives on top of the other models. And the way it works is actually quite cool. With the ensembles, we know approximately what situations each model are going to be good at ahead of time. And we
Mm-hmm.
also know how each model compares to the other models in terms of their accuracies on different domains. So we have a couple of models that are generally pretty accurate. They're not the best at anything and they're really expensive to run,
Mm-hmm.
but they're generally going to do a pretty good job. And then we have a ton of little specialized models that are total trash in most situations, but really fantastic in their in domain. And
Mm-hmm.
so as we start analyzing a conversation, we're running the general models, which give us an understanding of what's going on in this conversation, what's the context. And then we use that to go look up which specialized models are more appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
And we can compare the specialized model output to the general model output to see, okay, are they roughly saying the same thing? In which case, we trust that we're in domain for the specialized models, and we can
Mm-hmm.
just run with that. Throw away the generalized models, and then you're really, really cost effective and really accurate. It's sort of an exploration versus exploitation optimization problem, which is really great because humanity in general has a ton of experience with optimization problems. So there are
Mm-hmm.
really great algorithms to solve those as long as you can define your optimization objective very well.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, that makes sense. So, next question I have is, where is it being used today?
Great question. So we started out in gaming, moderating a bunch of very, very common, very widely known social games like Call of Duty, Grand Theft Auto Online, etc. So if you're playing those games and somebody's being super toxic and they get banned, you can thank us. But we're also running in a number of other situations like call centers, IT help desks, and other
Mm-hmm.
kinds of phone lines where fraud, security incidents, etc., can happen. And we catch attempts to, say, bypass a password reset identity check where a hacker could call in, say, hey, I lost my phone, I can't get my two-factor code. Text it to this new number instead. This is my new number. And obviously, they're a hacker, they're lying about their number, and people have policies in place to stop that from happening. But occasionally, you get an agent, they're there to help. They're supposed to be helpful. They're helpful people who
Mm-hmm.
says, oh, okay, sure, I can text it to that number. And you only need one mistake like that, and then you get a data breach. And so we actually see a lot of use of that, especially in the healthcare
Mm-hmm.
industry, where hospitals are huge targets for ransomware, data leaks, all sorts of bad behavior. And we're running on those phone lines to stop those kinds of faults from happening, sort of securing that human element of the equation.
So is it gonna be like an extra ping to the operator that like hold your conversation? This is a potentially like a fraud or hacker attack, like hang up or don't talk to this person, or how does it work?
We actually have a robust enough voice understanding model to allow you to do multiple different things depending on what's most appropriate for the situation and level of confidence. So, for example, take two scenarios. One scenario where somebody's calling in using a potential deepfake, and another scenario where somebody is pressuring an agent to bypass a two-factor check. So the first scenario, somebody's calling in, they're potentially using a deep fake. We can detect within 2 seconds of that audio that is extremely high likelihood of being a synthetic voice. But we don't know if that synthetic voice is malicious or not. I could be using assistive technology to call in and speak for me and still interact through that phone line. So the fact that we detected it was created by an AI like text to speech generator doesn't
Mm-hmm.
necessarily mean it's malicious, but you should be paying attention to it, especially if later on that person isn't representing themselves at all at as being using an assistive technology or that voice being synthetic, or if they're trying to say, oh, you know what I sound like, or represent themselves as somebody who would be familiar. That could be a deep fake attack. So as soon as we detect that, which again takes only 2 seconds, so it's right, hi, I'm trying to reach, right? We already know that isn't necessarily malicious. So that's more of an informational pop up. We're keeping track of that in case something else bad happens later in the call. But that can be a little pop up saying, FYI, we have high confidence this is a synthetic voice. And it just puts the agent on their guard that this could be a deepfake.
Mm-hmm.
On the entire other end of the spectrum is if we see somebody trying to bypass procedures and not responding well to the agent trying to follow those procedures, we know they're trying to socially manipulate their way through. So if I'm calling and I'm like, I need to approve a transaction, I need to log into my account, I've got to do this in the next 15 minutes, my phone's broken, I'm traveling, I'm on a train, I can't do a video call, whatever, 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 and they keep coming up with the excuses, that becomes a very suspicious
Mm-hmm.
hacking attempt or fraud attempt very quickly. And oftentimes the agent who's 100% focused on interacting with this person because this person's frustrated, they're pressuring them, is not able to also 100% focus on following the security procedures because they're in the middle of that conversation. And so we
Mm-hmm.
can pick that up and not just do an informational pop up, but you can also say, okay, we're going to lock that account, right? Like we're going to lock that account. This is too suspicious. We have high confidence. Our models are good enough at understanding the situation. We're going to lock that account and
Mm-hmm.
make sure that even if they convince the agent, they can't get around this safeguard. Or we're going to automatically escalate this to a superior. So, which the attacker doesn't want because that's additional scrutiny, but we're automatically going to get a supervisor on the line.
Mm-hmm.
So you can take those nuanced interactions depending on the context and what we're seeing.
I see. Okay, yeah, that's great. That's interesting. Are there any scenarios that when this tool is being used in like meetings or conferences or any like more social setup where many people are interacting with each other potentially?
We've had this tool running in situations where you have 1 to 2 dozen folks who are all kind of in a room talking to each other. Mostly not everybody talking all at once, like in a cocktail party kind of scenario, but more like a large Zoom room meeting where you may have maybe one main presenter or a few main participants, and then a couple other auxiliary people who maybe chime in with questions or specialized knowledge. That's a place where part of our understanding model is a speaker identification model,
Mm-hmm.
which can voice print a speaker and make sure we're associating the correct strain of conversation with that one person. So if you think just like, if you try to think through how hard is this problem, think you have a conference of 20 people, a couple people are talking, and one person chimes in 2 minutes in, and then they chime in again on something completely unrelated 15 minutes later. Just from the context of what's being said, it would be very, very hard to figure out that that's the same person, even
Mm-hmm.
if that information might be important for future analysis. So, by running all of these different voice native models, including a speaker identification model, we can actually match. Okay, all right, that was the same participant that asked those two questions, which could be important later. Of
Mm-hmm.
course, all of these models have different trade offs, like that speaker identification model. We don't by default match that speaker in a different call or track them across different environments, even usually in the same deployment, but especially across different kinds of calls. So if you call into two separate call centers, we're not going to be like, oh, hey, that's the same person, right? Because that runs into a ton of privacy and ethical quandaries that
Yeah.
we want to make sure we're staying on the right side of. So voice also is very interesting because of the biometric nature of it and
Mm-hmm.
how easy it is to cross that line.
Yeah. So, yeah, exactly why I wanted to transition to ethics now is because like there are few things that possible in real life, right? People from different cultures may have different rules, if you will, for ethics. Like you can't shake hands, for example, or you can't like greet each other and kiss each other and things like that. It's sometimes it's applicable, sometimes it's not. So, and same with speech, right? How does your models know all these rules? And if this breaks happen in this and your system flags something, like who's deciding whether it was right or wrong or whatnot?
Fantastic questions. I'll go in order of how do we have that
Mm-hmm.
broad, diverse understanding of different cultural norms, and then who makes the decision about whether or not we got it right.
Mm-hmm.
So, first off, how do we have that broad understanding? There's two different answers to that, both extremely important. The first is when you're building these models, you have to build in those diverse perspectives right from the start. So we actually have, as part of our data labeling team to build these models, both a very diverse data set of audio conversations from all around the world that we've sampled and sourced to get a very diverse set of training data. And we contract with data labelers and data analyzers also from around the globe. So
Mm-hmm.
we're not just saying, hey, let's grab a bunch of data from all over the world and then have one white guy sit in a room and type up what he thinks is going on, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're saying, okay, let's have not only the data from the different contexts, but also the labels and the analysis from those different contexts from people who have the best shot at really understanding what's going on and
Mm-hmm.
being able to encode that knowledge and nuance and diversity into the data set itself. Because ultimately, as you know, the algorithms only learn from the data
Yeah.
what's in the data. So you have to encode all of that into the data sets you train on. It's a ton of work, but it
Mm-hmm.
is absolutely worth it, not just from the knowledge that we're doing the right thing, but the benchmarks show it as well as you
Mm-hmm.
encounter all these different scenarios and our ability to say, hey, this person might be in a corporate context on one side of the globe, but maybe they're from a country that's on the completely other opposite side of the globe. They're bringing some of that over into that new
Mm-hmm.
context. And if we understand the context from both sides, we can do a better job at analysis.
Yeah.
So building it into the data sets themselves. And then who makes the decision as to whether or not our system got it right, in all of the contexts where we're deployed, we act as a filtering and escalation system, and we try to do the very, very best job that we can. But for our system and for literally any AI deployment out there, you have to have some objective you're measuring against to make sure you're delivering that value, which means that anytime we work with a customer and apply this filtering and understanding and detection, that customer has to have a process, has to already have a team or have the expertise to evaluate those scenarios and see if they're problematic or relevant. The problem that we solve isn't that those folks don't have any ability to figure out if somebody's being toxic or somebody's committing fraud. The problem is scalability. You have 100 million hours of these conversations every month. There's no way your expert can listen to all of them. And
Mhm.
so we're listening to all of them, we're filtering that stuff up, but it goes to the expert who can then make that decision. And by providing extra context and confidences around what we're escalating, which is a really important part of this ensemble strategy as well, is that I was talking about that representation of the conversation earlier. We can say, hey, we found this bad thing happening. Here's the context and conversation, and that's already pre-built. That comes for free from our model. So it makes it very easy for a human to engage with that and say, what's going on? What just happened? Is this okay or not? And then
Mhm.
that human expert reviews it.
I see. Okay, that's great. That's always good to know that there is some component like a human in the loop component that double checks on like corner cases and things like that. Yeah. Okay.
That's correct. And for different scenarios, you can have different threat models as long as you have an understanding of what you do if your existing model ends with a failure, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
for example, in a social gaming context, you can, in some cases, have, if you've got a high confidence violation, automatically ban that person, but you have to have an appeals process for when you get that wrong and the evidence so that you can actually review that appeal. You can't just ban
Mm-hmm.
somebody and say, oh, system said you were wrong, bad luck. Or, oh, okay, maybe you weren't doing something bad, but we don't have the data, we can't review it, so we're just going to have to go with what the system said. Neither of those are good answers. You always have to have an appeal process or a review process, and you have to have the data that backed the initial decision and the reasoning or logic of why that automated decision was made. Not
Mm-hmm.
only is that good practice, it's actually also legal requirement for a lot of different compliance laws around taking automated actions, that you have to have reasoning from the system of why it did what it did.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So, is there anything with ethics that keeps you awake at night? That's still a big problem that still needs to be solved.
The eternal problem, which is technology creates a lot of new opportunity and a lot of new power, and ultimately that can be used for ethically good purposes and ethically bad purposes, and it ultimately falls with whoever is deploying and using the technology
Mm-hmm.
to deploy it for good or bad purposes. On the one hand, we proactively understand all of these different conversations and prevent hospitals from getting hacked, prevent companies from being defrauded, prevent gamers from being harassed. Those are great things to do.
Mm-hmm.
That same exact kind of technology could censor people for political speech. It's exactly the same kind of models, exactly the same kind of tech, exactly the same kind of philosophy, just used for a negative purpose.
Mm-hmm.
We do a lot of know your customer to make sure that our tech isn't being used for those purposes, but we are inventing this technology and pushing forward that envelope. Once that technology has been invented, it could be used for those other purposes, and it's pretty much the same system.
Yeah, it's just a matter of different setting, I guess, right? Different rule that it will pick it up and start banning people. Yeah, that's unfortunate.
Correct. It is
Yeah.
unfortunate, but I also think it's pretty much unavoidable. Ultimately, people create
Hmm.
these systems, people tune these systems, people deploy these systems. It all comes back to the people.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So let me ask you a couple of founder questions. Like, can you remember a time, like the biggest technical challenge you had to overcome, or maybe something you did and you like underestimated the complexity or something like that?
Ooh, I can answer both. They're both fun questions. So the big kind of biggest technical challenge we overcame, especially early on, I would say, is just how diverse the audio ecosystem is. I alluded to this earlier in our
Mm-hmm.
conversation, but if I'm talking to you over this headset and then I pull the microphone and I'm just talking to you through my MacBook's built-in microphone, you will be able to perfectly understand what I'm saying either way.
Mm-hmm.
No problem at all. Almost every machine learning system on earth trying to analyze that will come up with very different results and have a very different performance profile for those two things. And God forbid I take this MacBook, I'm speaking into the microphone, and I push it like 5 feet away from me, and then I still talk. Now you've gone from near field to far field. And the problem is that all these audio data sets that these systems are trained off of usually have pretty standardized microphone setups. Or like if you're recording something, you're usually recording something into a microphone because you're recording it for a purpose. And so
Mm-hmm.
the audio data out there to build these systems are all on very specific kinds of audio setups, audio environments, and then you apply your algorithm to something that's slightly outside the environment, and it's total crap. It completely falls apart, and you're like, what on earth? And oftentimes you don't even know what's changed, right? I'm like, I used a laptop and it was great, and then I used a laptop and it wasn't great, and it happens to be like one was a MacBook and one was a ThinkPad, and I don't even think about that problem. But the quality of the audio, or just like the audio hardware too, like you can have little jumps, little glitches sometimes if you've got a certain audio setup or you're not using the right hardware or something like that, and that little gap in the audio, if that didn't appear in the training set, your algorithm has no idea what to do with it, and so your neural network will go do something random again. And so all of these differences in audio environment make it maddeningly difficult to build something
Mm-hmm.
that robustly works across all cases. It's very, very hard to do, especially if you're building a new model. Like for transcription, okay, there are a lot of great data sets, a lot of great starting points. You want to build like emotion detection or tonality or accent detection or other things that are slightly less well researched. You're starting from a very, very small set of labeled data and
Mm-hmm.
otherwise not a ton of research behind it. And you have to solve that same problem all over again. It gets very, very difficult.
Yeah, while you were talking, I was also wondering what is the difference between analog versus digital audio in terms of analyzing it and transcribing and giving this analysis for fraud and harassment and stuff like that.
Ultimately, all of the algorithms have to be converted into some digital representation before they're sent through the neural network. So
Hmm.
they end up going through analog to digital conversion somewhere.
Somewhere,
But
okay.
just as we were just talking about, where you do that analog to digital converter can make a lot of difference. If it's
Hmm.
a dedicated device, if it's built in, you start getting into like electronics noise. So like if you've got your ADC and it's sitting right next to your processor in your computer, then it'll start getting noises or glitches. Or actually one of the most fun most fun things was very, very early days. This was our first data set we built. There was this little like podcast recording room
Hmm.
in our co-working space when we started. This was back in 2019, and we were like, podcast room, amazing. That's the best place to go record our audio data set for our machine learning algorithms. So we set up everything like that, and we had to run the audio cables through the wall into the adjacent room so a recording engineer could sit there and plug them all into their audio interface and everything, because we were recording with like 5 different microphones all at once to build a
Hmm.
robust data set. And we had people come in, voice actors, and they would like read scripts, have conversations. We collected all this data, and then we listened to the data, and there's this like electronic like whir, beep, whatever going on in the background of all of it. And we're like, what on earth is this? Like, we have really high quality equipment. We have a noise treated environment. Well, it turns out the hole in the wall that we strung those cables through, there was an Ethernet cable running through it as well. And all of those signals, they were analog signals in the audio cables. They only got converted into digital signals in the audio interface itself. So those analog signals were getting interference from the Ethernet cables.
Wow.
And so it was funny because sometimes the noise would be higher or lower. I found out like when the noise was higher, it was because like somebody was on a Zoom call or something like that, and there were a bunch of bits going back and forth. And then in the middle of the night, nobody was doing anything with the Ethernet, and everything was silent, and the data quality was great. So it matters a ton where you do that conversion.
Yeah, that's a very funny story and interesting way to troubleshoot it, I'm sure.
That was a
Yeah.
nightmare to figure. We actually ended up going and getting a bunch of, because we couldn't like rip the Ethernet out. It wasn't our building; it's a co-working space, and that was the only hole in the wall because we also couldn't punch another hole through the wall. And so what we ended up doing is we went and we got a bunch of like PVC pipe, and we shoved the PVC pipe through the wall, and we coated it with a bunch of tin foil and like copper and these kinds of things to try to basically make our own shielding for this bundle of
Right.
of audio cables. And so we ended up, this wall. It might still be there actually because it was like 12 or 13 feet up in the air. It was like a really tall room. So we had to get a ladder. It might still have this PVC pipe sticking out at both ends that we used to run audio cables through. So
So that is a tip for somebody else to go and build something like that. It's already
yes,
there.
absolutely right.
Yeah.
Lots of PVC pipe, lots of tin foil.
Yeah. So looking into the future, what are you like excited or worried about with voice AI, like in general in the whole industry?
I think the most exciting thing, the guiding light, is Star Trek. You talk aloud to computer, and the computer does stuff. And people have tried to do this so many times, right? Like Siri was supposed to be this, Alexa was supposed to be this. People have made all sorts of AI pins and all that kind of thing. Everybody comes back to that same Star Trek vision of you talk aloud and say, computer, something,
Mhm.
something, quadrant, something, thrusters to something. And you just talk, and the computer understands what you're saying, understands the context that you're saying it, understands who you are you allowed to say that, right?
Right.
Understands everything about it and just goes and does the right thing. And people have tried to build it so many times and it's always failed because these systems don't have context, they don't have understanding, they don't have access, the users don't trust them, they can't interact with people in kind of that natural way. And again, like getting back to that, they don't have the history, right? Like if I'm doing a big long monologue and you want to analyze that monologue, you can kind of understand from context because I've been talking for half an hour and you're like, okay, all right, I've kind of
Mhm.
gotten this all figured out. But if I'm like saying half a sentence, uh like command or do this or do that or cancel the meeting, like cancel my whatever o'clock or something like that. You have to have a lot of context on who I am, how I usually talk, figure out what I'm trying to say in order to do that naturally. And voice interfaces are so hard because you don't have that visual information, you don't have any persistent information.
Mhm.
Oftentimes, you don't even get feedback. I say something into the ether and it's like, okay. And you don't know if it did the right thing or not. And if it tries to explain, okay, I'll do whatever, whatever, and it goes through all the different things it's about to do based on, then it's just like droning on and on. Like voice interfaces are very awkward and very difficult. But the
Mhm.
dream is that Star Trek computer. And I think we are getting the point with our kinds of voice understanding models, plus the general broader AI acceleration that's happening recently, to where you can actually have that kind of system in the not very distant future.
Yeah, so it's also maybe combining this comprehensive voice AI with visual, and then with like putting it in a robot that can move around, for example, right? Something like that. And then you have like the whole human-like brain, but in a digital format that you have all the sensors for audio, for video, for speaking even. You can probably, like, remember a few years ago, or maybe a couple of decades ago, the first AI like voices, even like Google Translate, when it speaks, you know that this is not human, like right away. So maybe this type of technology can also teach robot to speak like a human. So we'll see.
Absolutely, and interact like a human, and the quality of the voice is one thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it but it's actually very funny that you mentioned this. Actually, um I like to think about Stephen Hawking, for example, who I was
Mm-hmm.
lucky enough to meet at one point and say hi, and hear his iconic voice. And they actually offered to him at one point, hey, we can give you a more natural sounding voice if you wanted, and he was like, no, this is my voice.
Mm-hmm.
That voice, even a robotic sounding old school digital voice, has a meaning and has character. And so just like you said, when Google Translate speaks, it's a machine. It's not trying to be another machine, it's trying to translate something, right? Like,
Right.
the fact that it's a machine is actually fine and sometimes helpful, of reminding
Mm-hmm.
you, like, okay, this machine is fulfilling a purpose. It's not trying to be your friend, it's not trying to do whatever. It's fulfilling a role. Those voices all have character, and that's just another thing about audio and voice is the voice you use depends on the role and carries a lot of information. And it's not always just more human like is better. It depends on the purpose that system is trying to achieve.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. It's like time and the place and the use case. Yep, all of that. So, can you tell us also where can people learn more about your work? Check out your website maybe and see what's going on.
Fantastic. Absolutely. Yeah, please come over Modulate AI. We've got a ton of information. You can actually try it out yourself. We have a preview page where you can run recordings through and see how our voice understanding model performs. We've got a ton of benchmarks, a ton of data. We've got a white paper if you want to dig into the details. Everything's all linked from our website, so that's a great starting point. Also, we
Mm-hmm.
do a ton of posts and commentary across our social media. Again, all sort of linked from that centralized place. So feel free to go check those out. And you can always reach out with questions if you have them. We're happy to talk. We love talking about this stuff.
Yeah. Okay, great. And then at the end, I have a few innovation questions, the generic questions I ask every guest, just for my own library and collecting how people think about innovation. So the first question is, how do you define innovation in a few words?
Doing something that people thought wasn't possible.
Hmm. Okay,
Because you can
interesting.
you can do a lot of like interesting things. You can do a lot of cool things that nobody else has done before, and that can be really cool or useful or valuable. But when I think of innovators, I think if somebody did that, and I'm like, I didn't even realize that was possible. And because they've now done that, they've unlocked a whole new,
Hmm.
almost suite of thinking, world of possibilities, right? An innovator doesn't just do something new and you've got that one thing. They open up a whole new world of, like, I didn't even think you could do that. Now, what are all the ways I can use this? What are the ways could I do something else like that? They makes people think about the possibilities, and they haven't thought about the possibilities before because it didn't even register in their mind that was possible. So that's why I
Yeah.
like that definition.
No, that's a great definition. Yeah, I don't think I heard this one before. So, yeah. Okay. So the next one is throughout the whole human history, which innovation do you think changed the world the most?
Change the world the most? I mean, that's a pretty big question. I think it's hard to go wrong with a lot of the, like, agricultural or fire kind of answers, things like that. Printing press. I'll go for something maybe a little more recent. Maybe is not as disruptive as like fire, but still really impactful to me, which is, I think, video calls. Um,
Hmm.
Not just for corporate meetings or things like that, but for me in my own personal life. I think the world has changed a ton in the past 100 years in terms of how much people travel, how much people move, how just global and big everything is. Like, you're no longer, you can work with people, you can know people, you can be friends with people all across the globe in a way that was really, really hard to do not very long within living memory.
Hmm.
And for me personally, for example, my first job right out of college was out in California. And I was living in Pasadena, right outside of LA. And I was maintaining a long distance relationship with my girlfriend, now wife. And we did that for 2 years. And the thing that kept our relationship together was we would watch like little shows or movies on Zoom together, and we wouldn't even like talk to each other very much. We would just like both press play at the same time, and it was like sitting together watching a movie, but I was on the other side of the country, and I could still maintain that relation. There was something about just the presence. It didn't even matter the picture quality. It doesn't even matter the voice quality. It didn't even none of the technical details mattered. It's just that sort of video call enabled that sense of presence that maintained that relationship. And so I think that has been hugely impactful, not just for, business or tech purposes, but personally and socially.
Yeah, yeah. I agree with that. That's pretty cool how the distance basically shrank so much, and you don't have to even. Well, we had phones, but phone is not the same as video, right? You could see the expressions and everything. Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah. So the final question is, which technology that we use today do you think we will be laughing at 10 years from now?
Social media. I think, a lot of people are like, AI is going to change the world. AI is going to change the world. I think that's true. I think a lot of the AI is going to change the world are in many ways, some people are going way too far, and, the answer is kind of in the middle. I don't think every prediction about AI is going to come true, but I do think social media is so vulnerable to this, right? Like, the data sets that these systems are trained on are mostly like social media data sets. These
Yeah.
algorithms are very, very good at pursuing objectives, pursuing certain kinds of tasks or strategies, and doing so through the medium of social media. And it is very, very difficult to tell a real like Reddit post from a
Mhm.
fake Reddit post, right? Like, it's not like you have that pre existing connection to that person that you've had for 10 years, right? These are other people. And previously it was easy to spot bots and people mostly ignored them or blocked them. But I think we've passed that point already. We're starting to see the effects. I think just
Mhm.
social media with random internet strangers, that really is on the chopping block. And I expect us to end up going in one of two directions. Either you don't really care that the content that you're seeing is synthetically generated, even if it's social content, you're just getting kind of that dopamine hit. And then the
Mhm.
other direction is going back to more well known communities, small groups. Like iMessage is your social media, where it's just like a tiny small group of people you already know, and those are the people you chat with. In the days of the big wide open internet forums where you're just interacting with a bunch of strangers, I think those days are numbered.
Mhm. Okay, sounds good. I'm looking forward to that. I can cut I can cut out my time on social media, so
There you go. That's right.
that's
That's
for
right. That's
sure.
what kills the addiction is
Right.
technology. Yep.
Yeah. All right, Carter. Thank you very much for your time and sharing what you're building with us today. That's been a pleasure.
Vit, it was extraordinary. I loved this conversation. Thank you so much for having me.
Sure. We'll stay in touch. Bye.
Absolutely. Bye.
I hope this conversation gave you fresh ideas and inspiration. If so, please share it with your friends and colleagues. Don't forget to follow, subscribe, and leave a quick comment. It helps more people discover this episode. See you next time.